Hi, my name is Stephanie Macias Arlington, and welcome to my audio and visual presentation of my capstone, The Relationship Between Civic Knowledge and Income Stratification. This capstone seeks to explore the relationship between civic knowledge and income to gain a better understanding as to why low-income citizens have low levels of civic knowledge. On a personal note, this is a very interesting topic for me. I've been passionate about it throughout my SPA career and tenure. I first explored this topic in my second semester of the program in political economy, then looked at it again in research methodologies, and now I find myself culminating my master's program with the concept of civic knowledge. I've always thought that it's important to be a good citizen in society, and we often learn the way to navigate the political, economic, and social structures of the nation through civic knowledge. And so that's why I find it to be such an integral part of the fabric of society and why I chose it for my capstone. So the definition of civic knowledge. It's usually a very lofty and ethereal definition, but basically it's an understanding and awareness of historical events, political structures, the process of government, social and political networks for change, and the legal system. Others have also defined it as an understanding of political structures, political actors, historical events, and public policy issues. I like the definition that includes public policy issues. But in other words, civic knowledge is the ability to navigate the larger social and political fabric of society. Civic knowledge engagement is an output of civic knowledge. It's the mechanism through which we as citizens learn how to develop attitudes and behaviors towards structures of government. And we exercise our civic duty through engagement activities. You know them as voting, volunteering, political activism, campaigning, and participating in public discourse and forums, like attending a board meeting in your municipality. And despite Americans donating, giving money to local charities, recycling, volunteering as senior senators, civic knowledge gains have stagnated and are actually declining. And so just because that viral social media campaign around ALS, you thought that maybe the social movement power was happening and people were really exercising their civic duties and were really being part of society. In actuality, the state of civics in the United States is dismally low. Research has found that only 25% of American 4th, 8th, and 12th graders perform proficiently when tested on civics. There's also research to show that less than a third of 8th graders can identify the purpose of the Declaration of Independence on a multiple choice test. And less than a fifth of high school seniors can explain how citizen participation in democracy benefits society. Again, dismal, terrible affair on the status of civic knowledge in the United States. In 2011, U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan actually tried to confront the educational state of civics in a speech, and he revealed that nearly 2/3 of Americans could not name the three branches of government, less than half of the public could not name a Supreme Court justice, and more than a quarter did not know who America fought in the Revolutionary War. And while civic knowledge is generally low across the population, low-income minorities have the lowest rates of participation and knowledge. Whites and Asians consistently score higher than African Americans and Hispanics on civic aptitude tests, and low-income citizens are less engaged in the U.S. political process. It was found that in a senator's election a few years ago, 60 million Americans had no to little effect on the senator's votes. We are literally having large swaths of the American population become disengaged and disconnected from the political process of the United States. So what's the big deal? Why even care about civic knowledge, gains or losses? The weakening of civic knowledge and the inability to demonstrate democratic capacities, principles, and values can be detrimental to society. It can negatively impact our voting practices. It can hamper our community activism practices. It can discourage students and citizens from participating in political discourse. We can have negative dispositions of government start to arise, and this ultimately erodes the institution of democracy. It also impacts the citizenship concept in the world. One of the best defenses we have against the current racial tension of today is civic knowledge and engagement. It promotes social cohesion, it promotes social conscious values and being a good citizen and identifying as part of a larger process. And so civic knowledge gains actually can make us a better society in the end. Through my literature review, I found that others are asking why are poor people exhibiting lower levels of civic knowledge. And they usually cluster their research in 4 different categories that include age, education, income, and social capital. The first concept that may be a predictor to low levels of civic knowledge in the poor is age, which makes a lot of sense. When you're young, you need to be taught principles and values and certain educational topics. The problem is that youth are at the mercy of the schools that they attend. And so if civics is not a high priority topic, it's not going to be taught. More on that later. The absence of adults also contributes to this lack of civic knowledge gain. Adults, especially in low-income communities, don't have high levels of civic knowledge themselves. So how can we ask them to pass down civic knowledge gains to each generation? It's not happening. With regard to education, a whole slew of variables are affecting the education status on civic knowledge. Generally, low curriculum requirements are affecting public school systems. There are no requirements to address civic education at the moment, nationally. It's up to each district, each region, each state, whether or not they want to provide history and social studies with an integration of civics. Fun fact, in New Jersey, a single civics course is left to the discretion of local school districts and is not required K through 12. So a student in New Jersey can actually go K through 12 school step by step and not learn civics any point in their year. There are also inappropriate assessment measures, if any. So how are we even testing civics besides the National Centers for Education and other national organizations and think tanks? We have no internal processes nationally to assess civic knowledge in students. There's also inadequate teacher preparation that might be failing our students. We don't have certifications in civics. We really just rely on history and social studies to deliver civics education. And the last would be, there's really no mandated federal funding for civics. There's been an overemphasis on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and we've unwittingly put civics to the wayside. Income is another reason why poor people experience low levels of civic knowledge. It is actually one of the largest and most significant gaps in between rich and poor is income with civic knowledge. Some of the research found that people that earn over $75,000 annually are politically active up to 6 times the rate of people that earn under $15,000. Now, I understand that as if you're rich and if you are wealthy, you have more time to devote to political activism and socialization. I also found that 90% of individuals in households of incomes of $100,000 voted in the 2008 presidential election, only compared to 52% who voted in the lowest income households. Again, 90% of people that made $100,000 voted, and only 52% of the people that had the lowest income households voted. Research also shows that high-income families are 4 times as likely to be part of a campaign work, 3 times as likely to do informal community work, twice as likely to contact their elected official, twice as likely to protest, 6 times as likely to sit on a board. The last concept that I found prominently in the literature was social capital. This was a really enlightening concept to me. So social capital is essentially a collection of resources that individuals and groups put together, and there are norms and networks that stem from these groups. And social capital is usually exhibited through membership organizations, voluntary groups, and they stimulate participation in the political process on the community and individual level. You are most familiar probably with bowling leagues, trade and labor unions, and fraternal associations. Those are all catalysts for social capital. One of the leading researchers of social capital, Robert Putnam, in his book Bowling Alone, Decline of Social Capital, he actually said that good government is a byproduct of singing groups and soccer clubs. And so what's really interesting about social capital declines, which have been a consequence of the dwindling middle class, the collapse of the auto industry, and changing economic policies that have taken a lot of our jobs overseas. We have a decline of trade unions and groups that used to be able to motivate low to moderate income citizens, which were usually the ones that were holding these jobs in these sectors. And so as a consequence of the decline of social capital, we're now seeing a decline in civic knowledge and participation. So what I call the perfect rainbow, think of it as the perfect storm, but think of it in a more positive note. The perfect rainbow is when age, education, and income cumulatively come together and you have a rock star in civic knowledge. And usually the people that experience this rock star status are the wealthy and elite. Between the rich and poor, there's an immense gap of civic engagement. The 2010 congressional elections reported that the bottom of the distribution in voting voted at the rate of 3%, whereas the top voters voted at 80%. And at the top, they looked like 55 to 65-year-old adults with master's degrees and made between $100,000. Those that were voting at the 3% rate made $20,000 and were high school dropouts. This amounts to the top group engaging 23 times higher than the poor. 23 times. That's crazy. Which leads me to my research question. How does civic knowledge affect a person's income? Now, I have to preface that Professor Lin was right to tell me that my initial explorations were super overwhelming. I wanted to tie civic knowledge to crime. I wanted to tie it to minority crime data and see about policing patterns, because thinking that civic knowledge also attributes attitudes and behavior towards authority and to government in general. And there may be research and results to support a hypothesis around civic knowledge impacts on low-income communities, in urban communities and neighborhoods. And it even goes so far as to say potential civic knowledge gains can help you navigate legal systems. Should you use a public defender? Should you not incriminate yourself? What can you say or cannot say in court? These are all maybe ideas that I know of because my father works in law, but what about those that don't have those opportunities to learn those civic knowledge gains? But Professor Lin smartly told me to focus, and so I chose income as a measurement of civic knowledge against registered voter. So the idea being, if you're a registered voter, you're likely an engaged and active citizen. And income is the determinant that I would run all of my other variables like age, education, sex, etc. against. And for the purpose of my study, I used a data set from the Pew Research Center, and I used a multiple regression analysis. The dataset was from the Pew Center's project called the American Life Project, Civic Engagement in the Digital Age. I found this on the internet and thought it was a really interesting dataset because they asked probing questions like, how do you feel about your government? Do you feel your government works proactively for you? Are you a registered voter? Did you vote in the last election? Etc. And the survey was administered through telephone interviews in 2012, which was a presidential election year, which is also interesting to think about. They were conducted in English and Spanish and did landline and cell phones, but I believe there were some limitations around that, which I'll get to in a bit. The model that I used to find a linear relationship between socioeconomic status, income, and personal characteristics like age, education, and race was actually it was difficult, but we got it. And using the multiple regression model, we found that there are statistically significant variables in terms of income, and there was one unexpected. In my presentation, you'll see my table of coefficients, which include, again, income, age, parenthood, employment, race, education, internet use, gender, marriage, political party, and ideology. And I tested all of the characteristics to account for interaction effects. I wanted to see how all of them stood against income. And I found that all the coefficients for the independent variables in the model seemed to be statistically significant, as their p-values were smaller than 0.05. The only coefficients that did not seem to be statistically significant, and this was a surprise, was registered voter. The R-squared and adjusted R-squared are very low, which tell us the variability is not very well explained, and so the limitations might include the fact that there were some missing data points in the set, also that it was not randomized, and I also don't think that there was just enough data collected. Another limitation could have been that they only used mostly landlines, and the understanding is that cell phone use is more adoptive in younger minority populations, and so they were maybe missing a large swath of the population. So the unexpected result. As my key question is, how does civic knowledge affect income? And given the results of the model, I have to reject the hypothesis that civic knowledge impacts income, because the variable of the registered voter, the leading measurement of civic knowledge in the data set, was not statistically significant. The p-value was 0.505 of the coefficient, and that was larger than 0.05, showing that it is not statistically significant. Basically, it has no bearing on a person's overall income or vice versa. This was really illuminating for me because I had always assumed that if you were a registered voter, you were automatically probably situated financially and you were very proactive and engaged, but we're seeing from the results that it really has no bearing and it's not statistically significant. But we did find expected results. For example, the coefficient for age shows that with one additional unit, income increases. We know that. That makes sense. As you progress and as you gain experience and growth opportunities, you would, of course, grow your income. We find that if a person isn't a parent, it increases by 8.19 units. And if a person is white, income increases. Each unit of education, income increases by 1.013 units. And if a person uses internet, this was really interesting, income increases by 3.65 units. If the person was a man, income is 3.4 units higher than if a person was a woman. And if a person supports the Democratic Party or has a more liberal ideology, the results are statistically significant. This was again unexpected in that the research shows that factors that affect our income go beyond the typical traits of ethnicity, age, and education. So, which political party you select, Democratic versus Republican, was statistically significant. And whether your views were liberal or not was statistically significant. Again, really interesting to me that voting or not being a registered voter was not statistically significant, but actually stating your political party was statistically significant to your income. So with these outcomes in mind, some recommendations. I still think organizations and policymakers are incumbent to increase civic knowledge across school systems, education, and in low-income communities. We see that assertive strategies have the potential to build a more representative and engaged democracy, and it should be. We should not be having the wealthy perform 23 times higher in an election than the poor. However, the research demonstrates to me that there is no causal relationship between income and voter registration, and so I almost think that voting registration efforts need to be re-examined. I remember a few years back hearing about the MTV Rock the Vote. It was a motivational campaign to get youth and 18-year-olds are on the cusp in college to vote. And it's interesting that that was the push. And I wonder if there was really truly a significant impact and trajectory for these citizens. Because from my research, it shows that it's not statistically significant to your future income. And so in conclusion, while civic knowledge is not a fully internal construct, it's an external, abstract, it's the spirit of the community, and we all need to do better to help low-income citizens gain knowledge around civics and themselves in society. And while maybe we shouldn't be doing that through voter registration, we probably should be doing so in the school systems, in education, and in the homes where parents are able to teach from generation to generation the positive benefits of being a productive citizen of society. I hope you enjoyed my mini exploration of civic knowledge and income. And if you have any questions, concerns, I welcome them and look forward to talking through my thoughts. Thanks so much. Bye.